I stopped believing in God the day I buried my wife under the cottonwood tree behind our cabin. That was 18 months ago. Margaret died slowly, coughing blood into white handkerchiefs that I burned in the stove every morning. The baby she carried, our first child, died with her. I buried them together in a pine box I built with my own hands, and I have not spoken to God since. My name is Ethan Cross. I am 39 years old. I raise horses on 40 acres of Arizona high desert, 3 miles south of Fort Apache. The land is hard and dry, the kind of place that breaks men who come here looking for something easy. I did not come here looking for anything. I came here to forget. Every morning I wake before sunrise. I feed the horses. I mend the fences. I haul water from the well. At night I sit on the porch with a bottle of rye whiskey and watch the sun bleed across the horizon until darkness swallows everything. This is my life now. Simple, quiet, empty. It was a Thursday afternoon in late September when everything changed. I was repairing the north fence line, hammering a loose post back into the dry earth, when I saw her, a child, standing just outside my gate. She was small, maybe 6 or 7 years old, with tangled black hair and bare feet covered in red dust. She wore a dress that might have been white once but was now the color of dirt. She did not call out. She did not wave. She just stood there, one hand resting on her stomach, watching me with dark eyes that seemed too old for her face. I straightened up, the hammer still in my hand. The sun was behind her, turning her into a silhouette. For a moment my breath caught in my throat. The size of her, the way she stood there so still and silent, reminded me of what might have been. If Margaret had lived, if our daughter had been born, she would have been about this age now. I walked toward the gate slowly. The girl did not move. As I got closer, I could see her more clearly. She was Apache, or at least part Apache. Her skin was brown from the sun, her cheekbones high and sharp, but her eyes, those dark brown eyes, held something I recognized. Hunger. Not just for food, but for something deeper, for safety, for kindness, for a reason to keep breathing. I stopped a few feet from the gate. She looked up at me, and I looked down at her. Neither of us spoke. The wind picked up, carrying dust across the yard, rattling the dry mesquite branches. My old dog, a gray-haired mutt named Sam, came trotting over and sniffed at the girl through the gate. She did not flinch. She just watched. I opened the gate. The hinges creaked, breaking the silence. The girl took one small step forward, then stopped, as if waiting for permission. I stepped aside and gestured toward the cabin. She hesitated for only a moment before walking past me, her bare feet making no sound on the dusty path. Inside the cabin, it was cooler. The single room smelled of wood smoke and leather. I motioned for her to sit at the table, a rough-hewn thing I had built years ago. She sat down, folding her hands in her lap, her eyes never leaving me. I went to the cupboard and pulled out a loaf of bread I had baked the day before. It was hard and dense, the way bread gets when you make it alone and do not care much about the taste. I cut off a thick slice and poured a cup of water from the pitcher. I set both in front of her. She looked at the food, then back at me. I nodded. She reached out slowly, her small fingers wrapping around the bread, but she did not eat right away. Instead, she turned her head toward the open door, her eyes scanning the yard beyond. I understood. She was waiting for someone. I walked back to the door and looked out. The yard was empty. The gate hung open, swinging slightly in the breeze. There was no one else. Just the endless stretch of scrubland and the distant purple mountains rising against the sky. When I turned back, she was eating. Not fast, not desperate, but methodically, like someone who had learned to make food last. She took small bites, chewing slowly, her eyes still watchful. I sat down across from her and watched her eat. I did not ask her name. I did not ask where she came from. I just watched. When she finished, she wiped her mouth with the back of her hand and looked at me. For the first time, something shifted in her expression. Not quite a smile, but a softening, a small nod of thanks. Then she stood up and walked to the door. I followed her outside. She stopped at the gate, turned back to look at me one more time, and then disappeared into the gathering dusk. I stood there for a long time, watching the empty road until the last light faded from the sky. That night I sat on the porch with my bottle of rye, but I did not drink it. I just held it in my hands, feeling the weight of it, staring out at the darkness. Sam lay at my feet, his head resting on his paws. The air was cool now, carrying the smell of sage and dust. I thought about the girl, about the way she had looked at the bread before eating it, about the way she had turned to check the door, waiting for someone who never came, about the way she had nodded at me, a silent thank you from a child who had learned not to expect kindness. And I thought about Margaret, about the last words she had said to me before she died. She had been so weak by then, her voice barely a whisper, but I had heard her. "If we have a daughter," she had said, her hand resting on her swollen belly, "I want her to have dark hair like mine." I had promised her I would remember. I had promised her I would love our child with everything I had. But our child never took a breath, and now all I had left were promises to a ghost. I went to bed that night without drinking. For the first time in 18 months I fell asleep without the taste of whiskey in my mouth. The next morning I woke early as always. I fed the horses, mended a section of fence that had come loose during the night, and hauled water from the well. It was Friday. The day felt no different from any other, but I found myself glancing toward the gate more often than usual, half expecting to see the girl standing there again. She did not come. Saturday passed the same way, Sunday as well. By Monday I had convinced myself that she had been a one-time wanderer, some lost child who had stumbled onto my land by accident and then found her way home. I told myself it was better this way. I was not the kind of man who knew what to do with children. I was not the kind of man who could offer anything to anyone. But on Wednesday afternoon, when the sun was already low and the shadows were stretching long across the yard, I looked up from the water trough and saw her again. She was not alone this time. Standing beside her was a woman, tall and lean, with long black hair that hung past her shoulders. She wore a simple dress, faded and patched, and her left arm was wrapped in a strip of cloth stained dark with old blood. Her face was hollow, her cheekbones sharp beneath sun-browned skin, but her eyes, like the girl's, were fierce, unbroken. The woman pushed the girl gently behind her and stepped forward. She stopped about 30 feet from the porch, keeping a safe distance, her good hand resting protectively on the girl's shoulder. I set down the bucket I had been carrying and walked to the edge of the porch. Sam stood beside me, his tail low, uncertain. The woman watched me with the same stillness the girl had shown, as if measuring whether I was a threat or an opportunity. "My daughter came here a few days ago," the woman said. Her voice was hoarse, strained, but her English was clear. No accent, no hesitation. She spoke like someone who had been educated, which was rare for an Apache woman. "You gave her food." I nodded. "I have come to ask if you will let us stay," she continued. "Just for one night. We can sleep in the barn or under the porch. I do not ask for charity. I can work. I can haul water, tend livestock, mend fences. I just need one night of safety." I looked at her for a long moment, at the way her left arm hung awkwardly, clearly injured, at the bruises on her face, faded to yellow and green but still visible, at the way she held herself, straight-backed despite the pain. "What is your name?" I asked. "Nalin," she said. "It means maiden in my language. This is my daughter Liyana." The girl peeked out from behind her mother, her dark eyes fixed on me. I recognized her immediately. The same tangled hair, the same watchful expression. But now I saw something else. A thin scar across her left wrist, faint and old, and around her neck, a small brass locket on a leather cord. "Who hurt you?" I asked. Nalin's jaw tightened. For a moment, I thought she would not answer. Then she lifted her chin and met my eyes directly. "My husband," she said. "His name is Diego Vargas. He is a blacksmith in Tucson. He owns me, or he thinks he does. I am his legal wife, married before a priest 5 years ago. But the law does not protect women like me from men like him." The words hung in the air between us. Legal wife. The law does not protect. I understood what she was saying. She was not a slave who could be freed. She was a married woman, bound by law to a man who beat her. And in 1876, in the Arizona Territory, the law sided with husbands, always. "Why did you leave?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Because he was going to sell Liyana," Nalin said quietly. Her hand tightened on the girl's shoulder. "To a wealthy family in California. They wanted a child, and they did not care that she was half Apache. Diego told me Liyana was worth more as merchandise than as his daughter. So I took her and ran." I looked at the girl again. She was staring at the ground now, her small hands clutching the hem of her mother's dress. I could see the way her shoulders trembled slightly, the way her breath came too fast. I thought about Margaret, about the child we had lost, about the empty cradle I had burned in the stove a month after the funeral because I could not stand to look at it anymore. Then I thought about the girl standing in my yard 4 days ago, silent and hungry, waiting for someone who might never come. I stepped down from the porch and walked to the gate. I opened it wide. "Come in," I said. Nalin stared at me, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, she nodded. She took Liyana's hand and walked through the gate. I closed it behind them and led them toward the cabin. Inside, I gestured toward the table. "Sit." Nalin hesitated, then lowered herself carefully into one of the chairs. Liyana climbed onto the chair beside her, her feet dangling above the floor. I went to the cupboard and pulled out what food I had. Bread, a chunk of salted pork, a jar of honey. I set it all on the table, along with 2 cups of water. "Eat," I said. Nalin looked at the food, then at me. "We cannot repay you." "I am not asking you to." She studied my face for a moment longer, then nodded. She tore off a piece of bread and handed it to Liyana, who took it silently and began to eat. Nalin ate more slowly, her movements careful, as if every motion caused pain. I sat down in the chair by the window and watched them. The room was quiet except for the sound of chewing and the crackle of the fire in the stove. Outside, the sun was sinking below the horizon, turning the sky the color of rust. After they had eaten, I showed them to the back corner of the cabin, where I kept a pile of old blankets. "You can sleep here," I said. "It is warmer than the barn." Nalin looked at the blankets, then at me. "Thank you," she said quietly. Her voice cracked slightly, and for the first time I saw the exhaustion in her eyes. Not just physical, but the kind of exhaustion that comes from running too long with no safe place to rest. "Get some sleep," I said. "We will talk more in the morning." I stepped outside and sat on the porch. The night air was cool and the stars were beginning to appear, bright and sharp against the black sky. Sam curled up beside me, his warm body pressed against my leg. Inside the cabin, I could hear the soft murmur of Nalin's voice as she spoke to Liyana in a language I did not understand. Then, after a while, silence. I sat there for a long time, listening to the sound of 2 people breathing in the room behind me. It was a sound I had not heard in 18 months. It was strange, unfamiliar, but not unwelcome. The next morning, I woke to the smell of smoke. I jerked upright, my hand instinctively reaching for the rifle I kept beside the bed. But then I heard movement outside. Footsteps, the scrape of metal against wood. I pulled on my boots and stepped outside. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the eastern sky in shades of gold and pink. And there, beside the well, was Nalin. She had drawn a bucket of water and was washing Liyana's face and hands, her own injured arm held awkwardly at her side. The girl stood still, eyes closed, as her mother cleaned away the dust and grime of the road. I watched them for a moment, then cleared my throat. Nalin turned, her expression guarded. "You did not have to do that," I said. "I know," she replied, "but I wanted to." I walked over to the well and looked down at the bucket. "Your arm," I said. "It is hurt. You should not be hauling water." "I can manage." "I am sure you can," I said, "but you do not have to." She looked at me for a long moment, her dark eyes searching my face. Then she nodded slowly. "Thank you." I picked up the bucket and carried it to the trough for the horses. Nalin followed me, Liyana walking silently at her side. We worked together in silence, filling the trough, feeding the horses, checking the fences. It was strange, having another person there. Strange, but not bad. By mid-morning we were sitting on the porch, drinking water and watching the heat shimmer across the scrubland. Liyana was playing with Sam, throwing a stick for him to fetch. The dog, old and slow as he was, seemed to enjoy the attention. "How long can we stay?" Nalin asked quietly. I thought about her question, about the law, about Diego Vargas, the blacksmith in Tucson who considered his wife and daughter his property, about what would happen if he came looking for them. "As long as you need," I said. Nalin turned to look at me, surprise flickering across her face. "You do not know what you are offering." "Maybe not," I said, "but I know what it feels like to lose someone, and I know what it feels like to live in a house that is too empty." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You lost someone." It was not a question. "My wife," I said, 18 months ago, and the child she was carrying." Nalin looked down at her hands. "I am sorry." "So am I." We sat in silence after that, watching Liyana play. The girl was laughing now, a light, airy sound that seemed to fill the whole yard. I realized it had been a long time since I had heard laughter, a long time since I had felt anything other than the weight of my own grief. That evening, as the sun began to set, Nalin made dinner. She moved carefully, favoring her injured arm, but she worked with a quiet efficiency that spoke of years of practice. She made a simple stew from the salted pork and some dried beans I had in the cupboard, seasoning it with herbs she carried in a small cloth pouch. When she set the bowl in front of me, I took a bite and tasted something I had not tasted in a long time. Care. Attention. The food was not just fuel. It was a meal made by someone who understood that eating together meant something. "This is good," I said. Nalin smiled, just a little. "My mother taught me." Liyana ate quickly, her spoon clattering against the bowl. When she finished, she looked up at me and said in a small, clear voice, "Thank you, mister." It was the first time I had heard her speak. Her voice was soft, almost musical, with a slight lilt that came from speaking 2 languages. "You are welcome," I said. After dinner, I lit the oil lamp and sat by the window while Nalin settled Liyana onto the blankets in the corner. The girl curled up, her head resting on her mother's lap, and closed her eyes. Nalin stroked her hair gently, humming a low, wordless tune. I watched them in the lamplight, mother and daughter, and I felt something stir inside me, something I thought had died with Margaret. Not love, not yet, but the possibility of it, the possibility that this house might not always be so empty. That night I lay in bed and listened to the sound of breathing in the room. Nalin's breath, slow and steady, Liyana's breath, lighter and faster, and my own breath matching theirs without meaning to. For the first time in 18 months, I did not dream of Margaret dying. I dreamed of a girl with dark hair, standing in a field of wildflowers, laughing. 3 weeks passed. It was strange how quickly the rhythms of the house changed. Nalin woke before me every morning, drawing water from the well and starting the fire in the stove. Liyana helped where she could, carrying small bundles of kindling, feeding the chickens I kept in the yard, scattering grain with careful hands. I did not ask them to do these things. But Nalin seemed unable to sit still. She mended my torn shirts with rough thread she pulled from the hem of her own dress. She swept the porch. She patched the hole in the barn roof where the rain had come through last spring. Her injured arm was healing slowly, the swelling going down, the bruises fading from purple to yellow. I watched her work and said nothing. I understood what she was doing. She was proving her worth, showing me that she and Liyana were not a burden, that they could earn their keep. But I did not need her to earn anything. I just needed the house to feel less like a tomb. One afternoon I was in the barn, repairing a broken saddle, when Liyana appeared in the doorway. She stood there, silhouetted against the bright sunlight, her small hands clasped in front of her. "Mr. Ethan?" she said. It was the first time she had said my name. I looked up from the saddle. "Yes?" She stepped inside, her bare feet making soft sounds on the dirt floor. "Mama says I should ask if you need help." I set down the leather strap I had been working on. "What kind of help?" She shrugged, a small, uncertain gesture. "Any kind." I looked at her for a moment, this small girl with her tangled hair and watchful eyes. Then I pointed to the pile of hay in the corner. "The horses need fresh hay in their stalls. Can you carry some over?" Her face lit up. "Yes, sir." She hurried to the pile and began gathering armfuls of hay, carrying them to the stalls one at a time. She was too small to carry much, but she worked with a determination that reminded me of her mother. I watched her as I worked on the saddle, and I realized something. I liked having her here. I liked the sound of her footsteps in the barn. I liked the way she hummed softly to herself as she worked. I liked the way she made the silence feel less heavy. That evening, as we sat down to dinner, Nalin looked at me across the table. "I need to tell you something," she said. I set down my fork. "All right." She glanced at Liyana, who was focused on her bowl of stew, then back at me. "Diego will come looking for us, not because he loves us, but because he believes we belong to him." I nodded. I had known this was coming. "How long do you think we have?" "I do not know," she said. "Maybe a month, maybe less. He has friends, people who will help him search." "What will he do when he finds you?" Her jaw tightened. "He will take us back. The law will support him. I am his wife. Liyana is his daughter. He has papers to prove it." "And if I do not let him take you?" She looked at me, her eyes searching my face. "Then you will be breaking the law. You could lose your land. You could go to jail." I thought about that, about the land I had worked so hard to keep, about the freedom I had earned after years of war and loss, about the life I had built here, quiet and small as it was. Then I thought about the girl sitting at my table, eating stew and humming to herself, about the woman who had worked beside me for 3 weeks without complaint, mending fences and drawing water with a broken arm. "Let him come," I said. Nalin stared at me. "You do not understand what you are saying." "Maybe not," I said, "but I understand this. I will not let him take you back to a place where you are hurt. I will not let him sell Liyana like she is cattle." Nalin's eyes glistened, but she did not cry. She just nodded once and looked down at her hands. That night, I sat on the porch with my rifle across my lap. The stars were bright overhead, and the air was cool. Sam lay at my feet, his ears twitching at every small sound. I thought about Diego Vargas, about the kind of man who would beat his wife and sell his daughter, about the law that protected men like him and failed women like Nalin. And I thought about Margaret, about the promises I had made to her, about the child I had lost before she ever drew breath. I could not save Margaret. I could not save our daughter. But maybe, just maybe, I could save these two. The next morning I rode into town. It was a 3-hour ride to the nearest settlement, a dusty collection of buildings clustered around a single road. I went to the general store and bought supplies: flour, salt, coffee. And then I went to the small office at the end of the street, where a wooden sign read, "Father Miguel Sandoval, Catholic Mission." Father Miguel was an old man, 70 at least, with white hair and kind eyes. He looked up from the Bible he was reading when I stepped inside. "Ethan Cross," he said, smiling. "It has been a long time." "It has," I said. "I need to ask you something." He set down the Bible and folded his hands. "Of course." I told him about Nalin, about Diego, about the marriage papers and the law that bound her to a man who hurt her. Father Miguel listened without interrupting, his expression growing graver with every word. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You are asking if there is a way to free her from this marriage." "Yes," he sighed. "The law is clear, Ethan. A woman cannot divorce her husband without proving adultery or abandonment. And even then, the courts rarely side with the woman. What if I could prove he hurt her?" Father Miguel shook his head. "Even that is not enough. Husbands have the legal right to discipline their wives. It is an ugly truth, but it is the truth." I felt something cold settle in my chest. So there is nothing. I did not say that, Father Miguel said gently. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the dusty street. There is one way, but it will require a great sacrifice from you. What kind of sacrifice? He turned to face me. If Nalin were married to another man, Diego's claim would be contested. It would not dissolve her marriage to him immediately, but it would give her legal protection. And if you were her husband, you could apply to adopt Liyana as your own child. Diego could not sell her then. I stared at him. You are saying I should marry her. I am saying it is an option, Father Miguel said carefully. But you must understand what it means. You would be bound to her, legally and in the eyes of God. And Diego will not give up easily. He will fight. He will bring lawyers. He will make your life very difficult. I thought about Nalin, sitting on my porch in the evening light, mending my shirts with thread she pulled from her own dress. I thought about Liyana, carrying hay to the horses, her face bright with purpose. How soon can you do it? I asked. Father Miguel looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, I can marry you this Sunday. But Ethan, you must be certain. Marriage is not a tool to be used and discarded. It is a sacred bond. I understand, I said. But I was not sure I did. I was not sure of anything anymore. All I knew was that I could not let them go back to that life. I could not stand by and do nothing. When I returned to the ranch that evening, Nalin was waiting on the porch. She stood as I dismounted, her expression worried. Where did you go? She asked. I tied my horse to the post and walked up the steps. I went to see Father Miguel. Her eyes widened. Why? I sat down on the porch and gestured for her to sit beside me. She did, slowly, her hands folded in her lap. I asked him about your marriage to Diego, I said, about whether there was a way to break it. She was very still. And? He said there is only one way. If you marry someone else, Diego's legal claim on you would be weakened. And if you marry me, I can adopt Liyana. Diego would not be able to sell her. Nalin stared at me, her face pale. You are asking me to marry you. I am offering, I said, not because I expect anything from you, not because I want to own you the way Diego did, but because it is the only way I can protect you and Liyana under the law. She looked down at her hands. You would do this for us. Yes. Why? I thought about how to answer that, about Margaret and the child I had lost, about the empty house and the long nights sitting on the porch with a bottle I never drank, about the way Liyana's laughter had filled the yard like sunlight. Because I have already lost too much, I said, and I do not want to lose you too. Nalin's eyes filled with tears, but she did not let them fall. She just nodded once and said, Then I will marry you. That Sunday Father Miguel came to the ranch. He arrived in the late afternoon riding a mule, his Bible tucked under one arm. Nalin wore her cleanest dress, and I wore my only suit, the one I had worn to Margaret's funeral. Liyana stood between us, her small hand in mine. Father Miguel spoke the words in Spanish first, then in English. I repeated them, my voice steady. Nalin repeated them too, her voice barely above a whisper. And then it was done. We were married. Father Miguel blessed us and rode away, leaving us standing in the yard as the sun set behind the mountains. Liyana looked up at me, her dark eyes wide. Are you my papa now? She asked. I looked at Nalin. She nodded, just slightly. Yes, I said. I am your papa now. Liyana smiled, a bright, sudden smile that made something twist in my chest. Then she threw her arms around my waist and held on tight. I stood there, one hand resting awkwardly on her small back, and looked at Nalin over the top of Liyana's head. She was watching us, her expression soft and sad and hopeful all at once, and I realized in that moment that I had just made a promise I was not sure I could keep. But I would try. God help me. I would try. That night, as Liyana slept on her blankets in the corner, Nalin and I sat on the porch in silence. The stars were bright overhead, and the air was cool and still. Thank you, she said quietly. You owe me nothing, I said quietly. She shook her head, her eyes bright. I owe you everything. We sat there for a long time, not touching, not speaking. Just two people who had found each other in the middle of nowhere, bound together by a marriage that was not quite real and not quite false. And somewhere out there, in the darkness beyond the gate, Diego Vargas was coming. I could feel it, like a storm on the horizon, like the first tremor of an earthquake. But for tonight, we were safe. For tonight, we were together. And that, I told myself, would have to be enough. The weeks after the wedding fell into a rhythm I had not known in years. Each morning, I woke to the smell of coffee brewing on the stove. Nalin was always up before me, moving quietly through the cabin, her injured arm growing stronger each day. Liyana would be sitting at the table, practicing her letters on a slate board I had bought her in town. She would look up when I entered and say, "Good morning, Papa." And every time she said it, something in my chest would tighten. I was not her real father. This was not a real family. But some mornings, when the light came through the window just right and I saw them both sitting there, I could almost believe it was. Nalin taught me things I had forgotten, how to cook more than just beans and salt pork, how to make bread that did not taste like leather. She showed me how to brew tea from desert sage that eased the ache in my back from years of hard work. In return, I taught Liyana how to ride a horse, how to mend a fence, how to read the weather in the color of the sky. But beneath the surface of our quiet life, I could feel the tension building. Nalin grew more watchful as the weeks passed. She would pause in her work to stare out at the road, her body tense, her eyes scanning the horizon. At night, I would wake to find her standing at the window, her silhouette dark against the starlight. "He is coming," she said one night when she caught me watching her. "How do you know?" "I can feel it," she said, "the way you can feel a storm before it arrives." She was right. 3 days later, Father Miguel came riding up the road on his old mule. But he was not alone. Behind him, moving slowly, was a wagon. And sitting on the wagon bench was a man I had never seen before, but whose face I recognized from Nalin's description, Diego Vargas. He was a big man, broad-shouldered and thick through the middle, with a black beard that covered most of his face. His eyes were small and dark, set deep beneath heavy brows. He wore a leather apron over his shirt, stained with soot and grease from his blacksmith's forge. Even from a distance, I could see the scar that ran from his left cheekbone down to his jaw, a pale line against his sun-darkened skin. Beside him sat another man, younger and leaner, dressed in a brown suit with a silver badge pinned to his vest, Deputy Marshal Wallace. I had met him once before, years ago, when I first settled on this land. He was a good man, as far as lawmen went, fair-minded, but he was also a man who followed the law, even when the law was wrong. I stepped out onto the porch. Nalin was inside with Liyana, but I could feel her watching through the window. My rifle leaned against the wall beside the door, within easy reach. The wagon stopped at the gate. Father Miguel dismounted first, his face grave. He walked up to the porch and spoke in a low voice. "I am sorry, Ethan. I tried to delay them, but they have legal papers. I thought it was better that I came with them, to make sure things did not get out of hand." "I understand," I said. "Thank you for coming." Diego climbed down from the wagon and walked to the gate. He moved with a heavy, deliberate stride, like a man who was used to getting what he wanted through size and intimidation alone. Deputy Marshal Wallace followed, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip. Not threatening, but ready. Diego stopped at the gate and looked up at me. When he spoke, his voice was rough and accented, the English shaped by years of speaking Spanish first. "You are Ethan Cross," he said. It was not a question. "I am. You have my wife and my daughter inside your house." "I have my wife and my daughter inside my house," I said evenly. Diego's face darkened. "Do not play games with me, gringo. Nalin is my legal wife, married before a priest 5 years ago. I have the papers to prove it." Deputy Marshal Wallace stepped forward. "Mr. Cross, I need to speak with Mrs. Vargas. The law requires that I verify her identity and ensure she is here of her own free will." "She is here of her own free will," I said, "and her name is Mrs. Cross now. We were married 3 weeks ago, also before a priest. Wallace's eyebrows rose. You married her while she was still legally married to Mr. Vargas? I married her to protect her from Mr. Vargas. Diego spat on the ground. You cannot steal another man's wife and call it protection. I did not steal anyone, I said. Nalin chose to leave you. She chose to marry me. Those were her choices. She has no right to choose, Diego growled. She is my property. The law says so. Wallace raised a hand. That is not what the law says, Mr. Vargas. Your wife is not your property. But you are correct that she is still legally your wife, at least until a court rules otherwise. He turned to me. Mr. Cross, I need to speak with her. I am not here to drag anyone away. I am here to understand the situation. I looked at Father Miguel. He nodded slightly. I stepped inside the cabin and found Nalin standing in the middle of the room, Liyana pressed against her side. Her face was pale, but calm. The marshal wants to talk to you, I said. She nodded. I know. You do not have to go out there. Yes, she said. I do. She walked to the door, Liyana still clinging to her dress. I followed them out onto the porch. Wallace took off his hat and held it in his hands, a gesture of respect. Mrs. Vargas, he said. Then he corrected himself. Or Mrs. Cross, if you prefer. I need to ask you some questions. Ask, Nalin said quietly. Are you here against your will? No. Did Mr. Cross force you to marry him? No. He offered me protection. I accepted. Wallace nodded slowly. Mr. Vargas claims you abandoned him without cause. Is that true? Nalin's jaw tightened. I left because he beat me, because he broke my arm and threatened to sell our daughter to strangers. Diego stepped forward, his face twisted with anger. That is a lie. I never hurt you. Nalin pulled her sleeve up, revealing the scar on her forearm where the bone had healed crooked. Then where did this come from? You fell, Diego said flatly. You are clumsy. I fell after you pushed me down the stairs. Wallace looked between them, his expression troubled. Mrs. Cross, do you have any witnesses to these incidents? My neighbor, Maria Santos, Nalin said. She saw him hit me more than once. She can testify. Diego laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. Maria Santos is a liar and a drunk. No court will believe her. Wallace sighed. He looked at me. Mr. Cross, I am going to be honest with you. This is a complicated situation. Mrs. Vargas, or Mrs. Cross, is still legally married to Mr. Vargas. Your marriage to her is not recognized by the law. And even if she can prove abuse, it will take months for a court to grant a divorce. In the meantime, Mr. Vargas has the legal right to demand she return to him. Then the law is wrong, I said. Maybe so, Wallace said quietly. But it is still the law. He turned to Nalin. I am not going to force you to leave today, but I will have to report this to the court. They will issue a summons. You will have to appear before a judge and explain yourself. If you do not appear, a warrant will be issued for your arrest. Nalin nodded. I understand. Diego stepped closer to the gate, his hands gripping the wooden rail. And what about my daughter? She is mine by blood. You cannot keep her from me. Wallace looked at Liyana, who was staring at Diego with wide, frightened eyes. The marshal's face softened. The child stays with her mother for now, he said. But Mr. Vargas, you also have legal rights as her father. The court will decide custody. Diego's eyes narrowed. When? The circuit judge will be in Phoenix next month. I will make sure you both receive notice of the hearing date. Next month? Diego repeated. He looked at me and something ugly flickered in his eyes. 1 month. Then we will see who the law protects. He climbed back onto the wagon. Before he left, he called out to Nalin. You will come back to me, woman, one way or another, and when you do, you will regret running. Then he snapped the reins and the wagon rolled away, dust rising in its wake. Wallace lingered for a moment. He looked at me, and I saw something in his face. Not pity, but understanding. He knew what it was like to love someone the law did not protect. I will do what I can, he said quietly. But you need to prepare yourself. The law does not favor women in these cases, especially not Apache women married to white men." "I know," I said. He put his hat back on and mounted his horse. Father Miguel followed, but before he left he gripped my shoulder. "God will guide you," he said. "I hope so," I said, "because I do not know what else to do." After they were gone, Nalin and I stood on the porch for a long time, watching the empty road. Liyana was crying softly, her face buried in her mother's skirt. Nalin stroked her hair, her own face expressionless. "What do we do now?" she asked. "We fight," I said. "We go to Phoenix. We tell the judge the truth, and we pray that he listens." That night I wrote a letter to Judge Henry Whitmore, an old friend from my days in the Union Army. He was a good man, a fair man, and he owed me a favor from the war. I explained the situation as clearly as I could. I asked for his help. I did not know if he would answer, but it was the only card I had left to play. 2 weeks passed. We heard nothing from the court, nothing from Wallace, nothing from Diego. The silence was worse than the waiting. Nalin grew quieter, more withdrawn. She worked harder than ever, as if she could outrun her fear by staying busy. Liyana clung to both of us, waking in the night with bad dreams. And then, on a Thursday morning, a rider appeared on the road. He was young, barely 20, wearing a dusty uniform and carrying a leather satchel. He dismounted at the gate and handed me an envelope. "Court summons," he said. "Hearing is in 2 weeks, Phoenix Courthouse. You are required to appear." I took the envelope and opened it. The words inside were formal and cold. Nalin Vargas, also known as Nalin Cross, was hereby summoned to appear before Judge Henry Whitmore to answer charges of abandonment and adultery. Failure to appear would result in a warrant for her arrest. Adultery. Diego was not just fighting for custody. He was accusing Nalin of a crime. And in 1876, adultery was a serious offense. If the judge ruled against her, she could be sent to prison, and Liyana would go to Diego. I showed the letter to Nalin. She read it slowly, her lips moving as she sounded out the words. When she finished, she set it down on the table and looked at me. "He is going to win," she said. "No," I said. "He is not." "How can you be so sure?" "Because we are going to tell the truth, and because Judge Whitmore is a good man." "Good men still follow bad laws." "Maybe," I said, "but we have to try." That evening I rode into town and found Maria Santos. She lived in a small adobe house on the edge of Tucson, making a living as a seamstress. She was a round woman in her 50s with graying hair and kind eyes. Her teenage daughter, Rosa, sat in the corner, stitching a dress with quick, practiced hands. When I told her what I needed, her face went pale. "Diego will kill me if I testify against him," she said. "He will kill Nalin if you do not," I replied. She looked down at her hands, rough and scarred from years of needlework. Then she nodded. "I will do it," she said. "God forgive me, I will do it." I thanked her and rode back to the ranch. When I arrived, it was late, and the cabin was dark. I stepped inside quietly and saw Nalin sitting by the fire, her face lit by the flickering flames. Liyana was asleep on the blankets, one small hand curled beneath her cheek. "Maria will testify," I said. Nalin looked up at me, her eyes red. "It will not be enough." "It might be." "And if it is not?" I sat down beside her. "Then we will find another way." She shook her head. "There is no other way, Ethan. The law is the law." "The law can be changed," I said. "The law can be fought." "Not by people like me." I reached out and took her hand. She did not pull away. Her fingers were rough and calloused, the hand of someone who had worked her whole life. "Listen to me," I said. "I made you a promise when we got married. I promised to protect you, and I meant it. I do not care what the law says. I do not care what Diego says. You and Liyana are my family now, and I will not let anyone take you away." Nalin looked at me for a long moment. Then slowly she leaned her head against my shoulder. I could feel her trembling. "I am afraid," she whispered. "So am I," said. We sat there together by the fire, holding each other in the darkness, while Liyana slept and the wind whispered through the cracks in the walls. And I prayed for the first time in 18 months that God would give me the strength to keep my promise. The ride to Phoenix took 2 days. We left the ranch at dawn, Nalin and Liyana riding together on one horse while I rode ahead on mine. The landscape stretched out around us, endless miles of red rock and scrubland, broken only by the occasional stand of cottonwood trees. The sky was vast and empty, the sun beating down without mercy. Liyana rode in silence, her arms wrapped around her mother's waist. Nalin sat straight-backed, her eyes fixed on the horizon. Neither of them spoke much. There was nothing left to say. We arrived in Phoenix on the evening of the second day. The town was larger than I remembered, a sprawling collection of adobe buildings and wooden storefronts clustered around a central plaza. We found a small boarding house near the courthouse and took a room. It was cheap and cramped, with thin walls and a single narrow bed, but it would do. That night, I sat on the porch outside our room while Nalin put Liyana to bed. Through the open window, I could hear her singing softly in Apache, a lullaby I did not understand, but that made my chest ache all the same. When she came outside, she sat down beside me. We did not speak. We just watched the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. "Tomorrow," she said finally. "Tomorrow," I agreed. "What if he wins?" I turned to look at her. Her face was calm, but I could see the fear in her eyes, the same fear I had seen the first day she came to my gate, asking for one night of safety. "He will not win," I said. "You cannot know that." "No," I said, "but I can believe it." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "If he wins, if they take Liyana, I want you to promise me something." "What?" "Promise me you will take care of her, that you will not let Diego sell her, that you will fight for her even if I cannot." I looked at her, at this woman who had come into my life like a storm and changed everything, who had taught me that a house did not have to be empty, that a heart could heal if you let it. "I promise," I said. She nodded, satisfied. Then she stood and went back inside, leaving me alone with the stars. The courthouse was a 2-story building made of red brick, with tall windows and a stone staircase leading to the entrance. We arrived early, but the courtroom was already crowded. Diego sat at a table near the front, flanked by a man in a dark suit who I assumed was his lawyer. Across from him, at another table, sat Deputy Marshal Wallace. He nodded to me as we entered. Father Miguel was there as well, sitting in the back row. He gave me an encouraging smile. Beside him was Maria Santos, her hands clutched tight in her lap, her face pale with fear. Judge Henry Whitmore entered through a side door. He was older than I remembered, his hair completely white now, his face lined with age, but his eyes were still sharp, still intelligent. He took his seat behind the bench and looked out over the courtroom. "This court is now in session," he said. His voice was deep and commanding. "We are here to address the petition of Diego Vargas regarding the marriage and custody of Nalin Vargas, also known as Nalin Cross, and the minor child Liyana Vargas. Mr. Vargas, you may present your case." Diego's lawyer stood. He was a thin man with slicked back hair and a voice like oil. "Your Honor, this is a simple case. Mrs. Nalin Vargas is the legal wife of my client, Diego Vargas. They were married in 1871 before Father Miguel Sandoval, and that marriage has never been dissolved. 3 months ago, Mrs. Vargas abandoned her husband and took their daughter without permission. She then entered into a false marriage with Mr. Ethan Cross while still legally bound to Mr. Vargas. This constitutes both abandonment and adultery, crimes under the law of this territory." He paused, letting his words sink in. "My client is not a vindictive man, Your Honor. He simply wants his wife and daughter returned to him, where they belong." Judge Whitmore looked at me. "Mr. Cross, you are representing yourself and Mrs. Cross?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Then you may respond." I stood. My mouth was dry, my hands shaking slightly. I had fought in the war. I had faced Confederate soldiers with bayonets fixed. But standing in that courtroom, with Nalin's future in my hands, I was more afraid than I had ever been. "Your Honor," I said. Nalin left Diego Vargas because he beat her, because he broke her arm and threatened to sell their daughter to strangers. She came to me asking for protection, and I gave it. I married her to shield her from a man who treats her like property. The law may say she belongs to him, but the law is wrong." Diego's lawyer smiled. "Your Honor, Mr. Cross offers no proof of these allegations, just the word of a woman who has already proven herself dishonest by abandoning her lawful husband." "I have proof," I said. I gestured to Maria Santos. Maria Santos was Nalin's neighbor in Tucson. She witnessed Diego's violence firsthand. Judge Whitmore looked at Maria. "Mrs. Santos, please come forward." Maria stood slowly, her legs trembling. She walked to the witness stand and sat down, her hands gripping the armrests. "Mrs. Santos," Judge Whitmore said gently, "do you swear to tell the truth?" "I do, Your Honor." "What did you witness?" Maria's voice was barely above a whisper. "I saw Diego hit Nalin many times. I saw him push her down the stairs. I heard her crying at night when he locked her in the cellar for burning dinner. And I heard him tell her that Liyana was worth more money than she was." Diego's lawyer stood. "Your Honor, this woman is a known drunk. Her testimony is unreliable." Maria's face flushed with anger. "I am not a drunk. I am a widow who takes a glass of wine at night to help me sleep. That does not make me a liar." Judge Whitmore raised a hand. "Mr. Vargas, do you deny these allegations?" Diego stood. "I deny them completely, Your Honor. I never hurt my wife. She is making this up because she wants to be with him." He pointed at me, his face twisted with contempt. "And the child?" Judge Whitmore asked. "Did you threaten to sell her?" "I never threatened to sell her," Diego said. "I found a good family in California who wanted to adopt her. They would have given her a better life than I could, but Nalin refused to see reason." "So you admit you tried to give the child to another family without Nalin's consent?" Diego hesitated. "I am the father. I have the right to make that decision." Judge Whitmore leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled. "Mr. Vargas, the law does give you certain rights as a husband and father, but those rights are not absolute. They do not include the right to harm your wife or to dispose of your child as if she were livestock." Diego's lawyer stepped in quickly. "Your Honor, we are not here to debate my client's parenting choices. We are here to address the fact that Mrs. Vargas abandoned her lawful marriage and committed adultery. The law is clear on this point." Judge Whitmore turned to me. "Mr. Cross, when did you marry Mrs. Vargas?" 3 weeks ago, Your Honor." "And you knew she was still married to Mr. Vargas?" "I did." "Then you knowingly entered into a bigamous marriage." "I did it to protect her, Your Honor. It was the only way I could give her legal standing to fight for custody of her daughter." Judge Whitmore sighed. "Mr. Cross, I understand your intentions, but intentions do not change the law. Mrs. Vargas is still legally married to Mr. Vargas. Your marriage to her is invalid." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Nalin's hand tightened on mine. "However," Judge Whitmore continued, "I can rule on the matter of divorce. Mrs. Vargas, do you wish to dissolve your marriage to Diego Vargas?" Nalin stood. "Yes, Your Honor." "On what grounds?" "Cruelty, abuse, and the threat to sell our daughter." Diego's lawyer objected. "Your Honor, there is no medical evidence of abuse. Only the word of a bitter woman and a questionable witness." Judge Whitmore looked at Nalin. "Mrs. Vargas, do you have any physical evidence of the abuse you claim?" Nalin hesitated. Then she reached for the collar of her dress and began to unbutton it. I started to object, but she shook her head. She pulled the dress down off her shoulders, revealing her back. The courtroom went silent. Her back was covered in scars, long, jagged lines that crisscrossed her skin like a map of pain. Some were old, faded to white. Others were newer, still pink and raised. "Diego did this," she said quietly. "With his belt, with his fists, with whatever was close at hand when he was angry." Diego shot to his feet. "She is lying. Those scars are old, from before I married her." But Judge Whitmore was not looking at Diego. He was looking at Nalin, and his face had gone pale. "Mrs. Vargas," he said softly, "you may cover yourself." Nalin pulled her dress back up, her hands shaking. She sat down, and I put my arm around her. Judge Whitmore turned to Diego. "Mr. Vargas, do you deny that you caused those scars?" "I do." "Then where did they come from?" Diego faltered. "I do not know. Maybe from her people. The Apache are savages. They do terrible things to their own." The words hung in the air. I saw Father Miguel close his eyes in pain. I saw Maria Santos shake her head, and I saw Judge Whitmore's face harden. "Mr. Vargas," he said coldly, "you will refrain from making such statements in my courtroom." He looked down at the papers in front of him, then back up at all of us. "I am going to make my ruling," he said. "Based on the testimony I have heard and the evidence I have seen, I find that Diego Vargas has failed in his duties as a husband. The marriage between Diego Vargas and Nalin Vargas is hereby dissolved on the grounds of cruelty." Diego's face went red. "You cannot do this." "I can, and I have," Judge Whitmore said. "Furthermore, I am granting full custody of the minor child Liyana Vargas to her mother, Nalin Vargas. Mr. Vargas, you will have no contact with either of them unless Mrs. Vargas consents." He turned to me. "Mr. Cross, your marriage to Mrs. Vargas, while entered into prematurely, will now be recognized as legal and binding. You may apply to adopt Liyana as your daughter, and I will approve the petition." I could not breathe. I could not speak. I just sat there, stunned, as the words washed over me. We had won. Diego was shouting now, his lawyer trying to calm him down. Deputy Marshal Wallace stepped forward, his hand on his pistol, but Judge Whitmore simply banged his gavel. "This court is adjourned." The courtroom erupted in noise. Diego was shouting, his lawyer trying to calm him, but I noticed Iris Thornton sitting alone in the back row, her face buried in her hands. Deputy Marshal Wallace walked over to her. I could not hear what he said, but I saw Iris look up, her eyes red and swollen. She nodded slowly, stood, and walked toward the door without looking back. Later, Wallace told me he had given her a choice: leave the territory voluntarily or face charges for perjury. She chose to leave. I never saw Iris Thornton again, but I heard months later that she had opened a small bakery in San Francisco and was doing well. I hoped she had found peace. Everyone deserves a second chance, Mr. Vargas. If you continue to cause a disturbance, I will have you removed. Diego glared at me, at Nalin, at Liyana. Then he turned and stormed out of the courtroom, his lawyer hurrying after him. I turned to Nalin. She was crying, silent tears streaming down her face. Liyana was in her lap, holding her tight. "We won," I said, my voice thick with relief. "We are truly free," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Father Miguel came over and embraced us both. "God is good," he said. "Yes," I said, "He is." We left the courthouse and walked out into the bright Phoenix sun. The world looked different somehow, lighter, freer. That night we stayed in the boarding house one more time. Tomorrow we would ride home. But tonight we were just 3 people who had survived a storm. Liyana fell asleep quickly, exhausted from the day. Nalin and I sat on the porch, watching the stars. "Thank you," she said. "You do not have to thank me." "I do," she said. "You saved us, Ethan. You gave up everything to protect us." "I did not give up anything," I said. "I gained everything." She looked at me, her eyes searching my face in the darkness. "Do you mean that?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "I do." She leaned her head against my shoulder, and I put my arm around her. We sat like that for a long time, listening to the night sounds, feeling the warmth of each other's bodies. And for the first time since Margaret died, I felt something I thought I would never feel again. I felt whole. 6 months had passed since the trial. 6 months since Judge Whitmore dissolved Nalin's marriage to Diego and recognized our union as legal. 6 months since we rode back to the ranch as a real family, not just 3 people bound together by circumstance and desperation. Those months changed everything. The winter came and went, bringing cold nights and occasional snow that dusted the mountains in the distance. Nalin and I worked side by side, repairing fences, tending the horses, preparing for spring planting. Liyana grew taller, her face losing some of its childish roundness, her confidence blooming like the desert flowers that appeared after the rain. She called me Papa without hesitation now. She ran to me when I came in from the fields, her arms outstretched, her laughter bright and clear. And every time she did, I felt the walls around my heart crack a little more. Nalin and I shared the cabin, but we did not share a bed. She slept on the blankets in the corner with Liyana, and I slept in my old bed by the window. We were married in the eyes of the law and the church, but we were still strangers in many ways, still learning how to be together, still figuring out what this marriage meant. But slowly, carefully, something was growing between us, something neither of us had expected. It started with small things, the way she would touch my shoulder when she passed behind my chair, the way I would find myself watching her as she worked, admiring the strength in her movements, the quiet grace of her hands. The way we would sit on the porch in the evenings, not speaking, just being near each other, and that silence felt comfortable instead of awkward. One evening in late April, as the sun was setting and painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Nalin sat down beside me on the porch steps. Liyana was inside, already asleep, exhausted from a day of helping me plant corn. "Ethan," Nalin said quietly, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." She was quiet for a moment, her hands folded in her lap. "Do you ever regret it? Marrying me?" I turned to look at her, surprised. "No, never." "Even though it was not what you wanted? Even though it was just to protect us?" I thought about how to answer that, about Margaret and the love I had lost, about the empty years after her death, about the day Liyana first appeared at my gate, silent and hungry, and how that moment had started to wake something in me I thought had died. "When you first came here," I said slowly, "I married you because it was the right thing to do, because the law gave me no other way to protect you and Liyana. But now," I paused, searching for the right words, "now I stay married to you because I want to, because this house feels like a home again, because when I wake up in the morning and hear you moving around the kitchen, I feel something I have not felt in years." "What do you feel?" she asked softly. "Hope," I said. "I feel hope." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached out and took my hand. Her fingers were rough and calloused, strong from work, but her touch was gentle. "I feel it too," she said. We sat there on the porch as darkness fell, our hands joined, and I realized that somewhere along the way, this marriage of convenience had become something real, something worth fighting for, something worth keeping. But the peace we had built was fragile, and I should have known it could not last. The trouble came on a Monday morning in early May. I was in the barn, shoeing one of the horses, when I heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching, multiple horses, moving fast. I set down the hoof I had been working on and walked to the barn door. 4 riders were coming up the road, silhouetted against the morning sun. As they got closer, I recognized the man in front, Diego Vargas, and riding beside him was someone I had hoped never to see again. A woman with blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun, wearing a gray dress that was too fine for riding. Iris Thornton. Iris owned the restaurant in town, a small but profitable establishment that served meals to travelers and locals alike. She was a widow, her husband having died in a mining accident 5 years earlier. And for the past 2 years, before Nalin came into my life, Iris had made it clear that she was interested in becoming the second Mrs. Cross. I had never encouraged her. I had made it clear, as gently as I could, that I was not looking for a wife. But Iris was persistent, and when I married Nalin, I had seen the flash of anger in her eyes at church the following Sunday. Now she was here, riding alongside Diego, and I knew that could only mean trouble. I walked out to meet them. Nalin appeared on the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. Liyana stood behind her, peering around her mother's skirt. Diego reined in his horse at the gate. The other 2 riders, men I did not recognize, flanked him on either side. Iris stayed back slightly, her face composed, but I could see the satisfaction in her eyes. "Ethan Cross," Diego said, his voice heavy with contempt. "I have come with new business." "The court ruled against you," I said. You have no claim on Nalin or Liyana anymore." "The court ruled based on lies," Diego spat. "But I have new evidence. Evidence that will change everything." He pulled a folded paper from his coat and held it up. "This is a statement from Mrs. Iris Thornton. She has sworn before a notary that she saw you and Nalin together, behaving as husband and wife, 2 weeks before our court date. 2 weeks before Nalin's marriage to me was dissolved." I felt my stomach drop. "That is a lie." Iris spoke for the first time, her voice sweet and cold. "I saw you, Ethan. I rode out to your ranch to bring you some stew, wanting to be neighborly. And I saw you and that woman embracing on your porch. I saw you kiss her. You were clearly intimate, which means your relationship began while she was still married to Diego. That makes it adultery." "We never kissed," I said flatly. "We barely touched each other." "That is not what I saw," Iris said, "and I have signed a legal document stating what I witnessed." Diego smiled, showing yellow teeth. "You see, Cross, the law works both ways. If Nalin committed adultery with you before the divorce, then the divorce is invalid. She is still my wife, and Liyana is still my daughter." Nalin stepped forward, her face pale but her voice steady. "You paid her to lie." Iris's eyes flashed. "I do not need to be paid to tell the truth. I saw what I saw." "Why are you doing this?" I asked Iris. "What did Diego promise you?" For a moment something flickered in her face. Guilt, maybe, or regret. But it was gone quickly, replaced by cold determination. "I am doing this because it is the right thing to do," she said. "You took advantage of a vulnerable woman. You convinced her to abandon her lawful husband. Someone needs to stand up for what is right." "You are lying because you are jealous," Nalin said quietly, "because Ethan chose me instead of you." Iris's face flushed red. "How dare you? You are nothing but a savage who seduced a good man." Then I stepped forward, my hands clenched into fists. "Get off my land, now!" Diego held up the paper again. "We are not going anywhere until you hear the rest. I have filed a new petition with the court. Judge Whitmore will have to review this evidence, and when he does, he will see that the divorce was obtained through fraud. The marriage will be reinstated, Nalin will be my wife again, and Liyana will come home with me." "Over my dead body," I said. One of the men with Diego, a lean cowboy with a scar across his nose, put his hand on his pistol. "That can be arranged." "Stand down, Cutter," Diego said. Then he looked at me. "I do not want violence, Cross. I just want what is mine. You have 1 week to prepare, 1 week before we all go back to court. And this time, the judge will see the truth." He turned his horse and rode away, the other men following. Iris lingered for a moment, looking at me with something that might have been regret or might have been triumph. Then she too turned and left. I stood there, watching them disappear into the dust, my heart pounding. Nalin came down from the porch and stood beside me. "What do we do?" "We fight," I said, "the same way we fought before. But this time they have a witness, a white woman who will be believed over me. Then we find another witness, someone who can prove Iris is lying." "Who?" Nalin asked. "Who would stand up for us against her?" I did not have an answer, but I knew I had to find one. That afternoon, I rode to town and went straight to Father Miguel's mission. The old priest was tending his small garden when I arrived, pulling weeds from between rows of squash and beans. "Ethan," he said, straightening up and wiping his hands on his cassock, "I can see from your face that something is wrong." I told him everything, about Diego's return, about Iris's false testimony, about the new petition to invalidate the divorce. Father Miguel listened in silence, his face growing graver with each word. When I finished, he sighed deeply. "Iris Thornton," he said, "I have known her for many years. She is a good woman in many ways, but she has been lonely since her husband died, and loneliness can make people do desperate things. She is lying, Father. Nalin and I were never intimate before the divorce. We barely even touched each other." "I believe you," Father Miguel said, "but the question is, will Judge Whitmore believe you? Iris is a respected member of the community. Nalin is Apache. In a contest of credibility, I fear Iris will win. Then what do I do? Father Miguel was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he said, "You need someone who was there. Someone who can testify that they saw you and Nalin during that time period and that you were not behaving inappropriately." "I did not have visitors," I said. "We kept to ourselves." "What about Deputy Marshal Wallace?" Father Miguel suggested. "He came to your ranch several times during that period. He saw how you and Nalin interacted." I thought about that. Wallace had indeed come by a few times, checking on the situation, making sure Nalin was safe. He had seen us together. He had seen that we were respectful, careful, maintaining proper distance. "Do you think he would testify for us?" "I think he is a man who values the truth," Father Miguel said, "and I think he has seen enough injustice in his life to recognize it when he sees it." I found Deputy Marshal Wallace at the marshal's office in Phoenix. He was sitting at his desk, working through a stack of paperwork, when I walked in. He looked up, and something in his expression told me he had been expecting me. "Mr. Cross," he said, "I heard about Diego's new petition. Then you know why I am here." He set down his pen and leaned back in his chair. "You want me to testify that Iris Thornton is lying. I want you to testify to what you saw, that Nalin and I were not intimate before the divorce, that we maintained a proper distance." Wallace was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Sit down, Mr. Cross." I sat. "I need to tell you something," Wallace said, "something I have not told many people. 10 years ago I was married to a Navajo woman. Her name was Sarah Manihorse. She was the kindest, gentlest person I have ever known." He paused, his eyes distant. "My family did not approve. They said I was disgracing myself by marrying a savage. They cut me off completely. But I did not care. I loved her." "What happened?" I asked quietly. "She got sick. Pneumonia. I took her to the doctor in town, but he refused to treat her because she was Navajo. He said he did not waste his time on Indians. By the time I found another doctor who would help, it was too late. She died in my arms." His voice was steady, but I could hear the pain beneath it, the wound that had never quite healed. "After she died," Wallace continued, "I swore I would never let that kind of injustice happen again, not if I could help it. So, yes, Mr. Cross, I will testify for you. I will tell the court what I saw, that you and Mrs. Cross behaved with complete propriety, that Iris Thornton is either lying or mistaken." I felt relief wash over me. "Thank you." "Do not thank me yet," Wallace said. "Iris is going to fight this hard, and Diego has money now. I do not know where he got it, but he has hired a good lawyer. This is not going to be easy." "Nothing worth fighting for ever is," I said. The week passed too quickly. I spent every moment preparing, going over my testimony with Father Miguel, making sure Nalin understood what would be asked of her. Maria Santos agreed to testify again, despite her fear, and Wallace sent word that he would be there. But the night before we were to leave for Phoenix, something happened that changed everything. I was sitting on the porch cleaning my rifle when I heard a sound from the barn, a crash like something falling. I grabbed the rifle and hurried over. Inside the barn, I found Diego Vargas standing in the shadows. He was alone, and he had a torch in his hand. "What are you doing here?" I demanded, raising the rifle. Diego smiled, but there was no humor in it. "I came to talk to you, Cross, man to man. We have nothing to talk about." "I think we do." He set the torch down carefully, keeping his hands visible. "I am going to win in court tomorrow. You know it, and I know it. Iris's testimony will be believed. The divorce will be overturned, and Nalin will be my wife again." "The hell she will." "But it does not have to go that way," Diego continued. "I am a reasonable man. I am willing to make a deal." "What kind of deal?" "You give me $2,000, and I will drop the petition. I will sign papers giving up all rights to Nalin and Liyana. You can keep them both. I will disappear." I stared at him. "You are trying to sell your wife and daughter." "I am offering you a solution," Diego said. $2,000 is a fair price for your peace of mind." "I do not have $2,000. "Then sell some land, take out a loan, find a way. Because if you do not, Tomorrow I will take them both back. And I promise you, Cross, Nalin will suffer for every day she spent with you, and when I get tired of her, I will sell Liyana to the highest bidder." Rage exploded in my chest. I stepped forward, the rifle pointed at his chest. "Get off my land, now!" Diego held up his hand, still smiling. "Think about my offer. You have until morning." He walked past me, moving slowly, deliberately. When he reached the barn door, he turned back. "One more thing," he said. "That torch I brought? I was going to burn this barn down if you said no, but I am feeling generous tonight, so I will give you until morning. But if you do not have my money, I will burn more than your barn. I will burn everything you love." Then he was gone, disappearing into the darkness. I stood there, shaking with fury, the rifle still in my hands. I wanted to go after him. I wanted to put a bullet in his back and end this once and for all. But I did not, because that would make me no better than him, and because I had to believe that the law, for all its flaws, would eventually do the right thing. I went back to the cabin and found Nalin waiting for me, her face pale. "I heard," she said. "He wants money." "Yes." "Do you have it?" "No." She nodded slowly. "Then we go to court tomorrow, and we trust Judge Whitmore to see the truth." "And if he does not?" She looked at me, her dark eyes steady. "Then we run. We take Liyana, and we run as far as we can. And we never stop running." I reached out and took her hand. "I will not let him have you. I swear it." "I know," she said softly. "I trust you, Ethan." And in that moment, I realized something. This was not just about the law anymore. This was not just about protecting Nalin and Liyana from Diego. This was about us, about the family we had become, about the love that had grown between us, slow and careful but real. I pulled Nalin close and held her, and for the first time, I let myself admit what I had been feeling for months. I loved her, not because I had married her, not because I felt obligated to protect her, but because she had brought light back into my darkness, because she had taught me that a heart could love more than once, because when I looked at her, I saw not just a woman I had saved, but a woman who had saved me. "Nalin," I said quietly, "whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know something." "What?" "I love you." She pulled back and looked up at me, her eyes wide with surprise. Then, slowly, a smile spread across her face. Not a big smile, but a real one. The kind of smile that reaches the eyes and changes everything. "I love you too," she whispered. And there, in the dim light of the cabin, with Liyana sleeping peacefully in the corner, I kissed my wife for the first time. Not because the law said we were married, but because we chose each other. Tomorrow we would face Diego and Iris and whatever the court decided. But tonight, we had this. We had each other. And that was enough. The courtroom was packed. It seemed like half the territory had come to watch the trial. Diego sat at his table, his lawyer beside him, looking confident. Iris sat in the front row, her hands folded primly in her lap, her face a mask of righteous certainty. Deputy Marshal Wallace sat on our side, along with Father Miguel and Maria Santos. And in the back row, I was surprised to see several Apache women, their faces solemn, there to support Nalin. Judge Whitmore entered and took his seat. He looked older than he had 6 months ago, more tired, but his eyes were still sharp as he surveyed the courtroom. "We are here to address the petition of Diego Vargas to invalidate the divorce granted 6 months ago," he said. "Mr. Vargas, your lawyer may present your evidence." Diego's lawyer stood. "Your Honor, we have new evidence that proves Nalin Vargas, now calling herself Nalin Cross, committed adultery with Ethan Cross before her divorce from my client was finalized. We have a sworn statement from Mrs. Iris Thornton, a respected businesswoman in this community, who witnessed intimate behavior between Mr. Cross and Mrs. Vargas 2 weeks before the divorce was granted." He handed the statement to Judge Whitmore, who read it carefully. "Mrs. Thornton," Judge Whitmore said, "please come forward." Iris stood and walked to the witness stand. She placed her hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. "Mrs. Thornton," the lawyer said, "please tell the court what you saw." Iris's voice was clear and steady. I rode out to Mr. Cross's ranch on the afternoon of October 15th. I had made some stew and wanted to bring it to him as a neighborly gesture. When I arrived, I saw Mr. Cross and Mrs. Vargas standing on the porch. They were embracing, and then they kissed. You are certain of this? Absolutely certain. I know what I saw. Thank you, Mrs. Thornton. Judge Whitmore looked at me. Mr. Cross, do you wish to cross-examine? I stood. Mrs. Thornton, you said you came to my ranch to be neighborly. That is correct. But we were never friends, were we? In fact, you had expressed romantic interest in me, and I had declined. Iris's face flushed. That has nothing to do with what I saw. It has everything to do with it, I said. You were angry that I married Nalin instead of you. So you invented this story to punish us. I did no such thing. Then why did you wait 6 months to come forward? Why did you not mention this at the first trial? Iris hesitated. I was trying to give you a chance to do the right thing, to end your marriage to that woman and make amends. Or maybe, I said, you waited because Diego Vargas paid you to lie. Objection, Diego's lawyer shouted. But Judge Whitmore raised his hand. I will allow it. Mrs. Thornton, did Mr. Vargas pay you for your testimony? No, Iris said quickly. He did not pay me. But he did offer you something, I pressed. What was it? Iris's composure cracked slightly. He said he would help me expand my restaurant. He has connections in Tucson. But that was not why I testified. I testified because it is the truth. So he did offer you something in exchange for your testimony. It was not payment. It was a business arrangement. Judge Whitmore's expression hardened. Mrs. Thornton, in my experience, when someone receives something of value in exchange for testimony, that is called a bribe. It was not a bribe, Iris insisted, but her voice was shaking now. You may step down, Judge Whitmore said coldly. He turned to me. Mr. Cross, do you have any witnesses who can refute Mrs. Thornton's testimony? Yes, Your Honor. Deputy Marshal Wallace. Wallace came forward and took the stand. He looked directly at Judge Whitmore as he spoke. I visited Mr. Cross's ranch 4 times during September and October of last year, Wallace said. Each time I observed the interactions between Mr. Cross and Mrs. Vargas. They were always respectful and proper. They maintained appropriate distance. I never saw any behavior that suggested intimacy or impropriety. You are certain of this? Judge Whitmore asked. Absolutely certain, Your Honor. In my professional opinion, Mrs. Thornton is either lying or badly mistaken. Diego's lawyer stood. Deputy Marshal Wallace, is it not true that you have a personal bias in favor of Mr. Cross, that you sympathize with him because of your own marriage to a native woman? Wallace's jaw tightened. My late wife has nothing to do with this case. I am testifying to what I saw. If that makes me biased toward the truth, then yes, I am biased. Judge Whitmore looked at Diego. Mr. Vargas, do you have anything to add? Diego stood. Your Honor, I just want my wife and daughter back. That is all I have ever wanted. Is that why you threatened to burn Mr. Cross's barn last night? I asked. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Diego's face went white. That is a lie, he said. Is it? You came to my property last night and demanded $2,000 in exchange for dropping this case. You said if I did not pay, you would burn everything I love. I did no such thing. Then why did I find this in my barn this morning? I pulled a partially burned torch from my coat and held it up. This torch has your initials carved into the handle, D.V. Diego Vargas. Judge Whitmore leaned forward. Mr. Vargas, is that your torch? Diego's lawyer whispered urgently to him, but Diego shook his head. I have never seen that torch before in my life. But I could see the lie in his eyes. And so could Judge Whitmore. The judge sat back in his chair and was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke. I have heard enough. This court finds that the testimony of Mrs. Iris Thornton is unreliable due to her financial arrangement with Mr. Vargas and her admitted romantic interest in Mr. Cross. The testimony of Deputy Marshal Wallace, a sworn officer of the law with no personal stake in this case, is far more credible. He looked at Diego with undisguised contempt. Furthermore, Mr. Vargas's attempt to extort money from Mr. Cross and his threat of arson demonstrate that his concern is not for his family, but for his own financial gain. Diego started to protest, but Judge Whitmore cut him off with a sharp gesture. The petition to invalidate the divorce is denied. The divorce stands. Mrs. Nalin Cross remains the legal wife of Mr. Ethan Cross. Full custody of Liyana Cross remains with her mother. Mr. Vargas, you are hereby ordered to have no further contact with Mrs. Cross or the child. If you violate this order, you will be arrested and jailed. He banged his gavel. This court is adjourned. The courtroom erupted in noise. Diego was shouting, his lawyer trying to calm him. Iris had her face in her hands, but I did not pay attention to any of them. I turned to Nalin. She was crying, her shoulders shaking. Liyana was in her arms, holding her tight. I put my arms around both of them and held on. "It is over," I said. "It is really over." Nalin looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. "We are free." "Yes," I said. "We are free." Deputy Marshal Wallace came over and shook my hand. "Congratulations, Mr. Cross." "Thank you," I said. "For everything." He nodded. "I just did what was right." Father Miguel embraced us both, his old eyes shining with tears. "God has blessed you," he said. "Now go home. Go home and be a family." We rode back to the ranch the next day. The journey felt different this time, lighter, freer. Liyana chattered the whole way, excited about everything she saw. A hawk circling overhead, a wildflower growing beside the road, the mountains in the distance, purple and beautiful against the blue sky. When we reached the ranch, everything looked the same. The cabin, the barn, the fences I had mended so many times. But it felt different. It felt like home. That evening we had a simple dinner, beans and cornbread and coffee. But Nalin had made a special dessert, a sweet cake flavored with honey and cinnamon. Liyana's eyes lit up when she saw it. "What is this for, Mama?" she asked. "To celebrate," Nalin said. "To celebrate that we are a real family now." After dinner, Liyana went to bed early, tired from the long ride. Nalin and I sat on the porch, watching the sun set. "Ethan," Nalin said softly, "there is something I need to tell you." I turned to look at her. "What is it?" She took my hand and placed it on her stomach. "I am carrying your child." For a moment I could not breathe, could not think, could not do anything but stare at her. "You are sure?" I finally managed to say. "Yes. I have known for a few weeks, but I did not want to say anything until the trial was over." I thought about Margaret, about the child we had lost, about the years of grief and emptiness, and then I thought about Nalin, about Liyana, about the family we had built together, and I realized that this was not a replacement for what I had lost. This was something new, something precious, something worth everything I had gone through to get here. I pulled Nalin close and kissed her. "I love you," I said. "I love you too," she whispered. We sat there on the porch as darkness fell, her head on my shoulder, my hand on her stomach where our child was growing, and I felt something I had not felt since the day I buried Margaret. I felt complete. The months that followed were the happiest of my life. Nalin's pregnancy progressed smoothly. Her belly grew round, and Liyana was fascinated by it, always wanting to feel the baby kick. We prepared a cradle, the same one I had built years ago for the child Margaret never delivered. This time, it would not be burned. This time, it would be filled. Liyana started attending the small school in town. The teacher, a kind woman named Miss Sarah Johnson, welcomed her despite some parents' objections to having an Apache child in the classroom. Liyana was bright and eager to learn, and soon she was at the top of her class. Deputy Marshal Wallace stopped by occasionally, always on some official business or other, but really just to check on us. He and I became friends, bonding over our shared experience of loving women the world did not think we should love. Father Miguel came for dinner once a month, always bringing some small gift for Liyana. A book, a ribbon for her hair, a carved wooden cross. Even Maria Santos visited, bringing fabric she had sewn into dresses for Nalin and Liyana. She had opened her own small shop in Tucson and was doing well. As for Diego and Iris, we heard nothing from them. Deputy Wallace told me that Diego had left Tucson, moving south toward the Mexican border. Iris had sold her restaurant and moved to California. They were both gone from our lives, and good riddance. Spring turned to summer, summer to fall. And in late November, on a cold, clear night, Nalin went into labor. I sent Liyana to stay with Father Miguel while I helped Nalin. I had seen animals give birth many times, but this was different. This was my wife, my child. I was terrified. But Nalin was strong. She gripped my hand and breathed through the pain, never crying out, never complaining. And just after midnight, our son was born. He was small and red and wrinkled, with a thick shock of dark hair. He came into the world screaming, his tiny fists waving in the air. And when Nalin placed him in my arms, I looked down at his face and felt my heart break open. "What should we name him?" Nalin asked, exhausted but smiling. I thought about it, about all the people who had helped us, about the journey that had brought us here. "Henry," I said, "after Judge Whitmore, Henry Miguel Cross." Nalin smiled. "It is a good name." I looked down at my son, this tiny miracle, and I thought about Margaret, about how she would have loved to see this moment, about how she would have been happy for me. And I realized that loving Nalin did not mean forgetting Margaret. It meant honoring her memory by choosing to live again, by choosing to love again, by choosing to build a new life on the foundation of the old. The next morning, I brought Liyana home to meet her baby brother. She was shy at first, approaching the cradle carefully, as if the baby might break. But then Henry opened his eyes and looked at her, and she melted. "He is so small, Papa," she whispered. "He will grow," I said, "and you will help teach him everything you know." She looked up at me with shining eyes. "I will be the best big sister ever." "I know you will." That evening our whole family sat together in the cabin, Nalin in the rocking chair nursing Henry, Liyana on the floor, drawing a picture of her new brother, and me in my chair by the window, watching them all. This was what I had been missing. This was what had made the cabin feel so empty, not the absence of noise or activity, but the absence of love. Now the cabin was full of life, full of laughter, full of the sounds of a family. I thought about the day Liyana had first appeared at my gate, silent and hungry. About the day Nalin had stood before me, asking for one night of safety. About all the twists and turns that had brought us to this moment. And I realized that sometimes the things we lose make room for the things we find. Sometimes heartbreak is just the first chapter of a longer story. Sometimes, when you think your life is over, it is really just beginning. For 18 months after Margaret's death, I had walked through life hollow and faithless. But sitting there in that cabin, surrounded by my family, I started to believe again, not in a God who protected us from pain, but in a God who gave us the strength to survive it, to grow from it, to find new love on the other side of loss. Outside, the wind whispered through the desert. The stars shone bright and cold in the winter sky. But inside, the fire crackled warm and my family was safe. And when the dust finally settled, when all the fighting and fear and uncertainty faded away, what remained was simple. Love, family, home. That was enough. That was everything. And I was, at last, at peace. Epilogue. 1 year later, on a warm spring morning, I stood outside the cabin and looked out over the land. The fields were green with new growth. The horses grazed peacefully in the pasture. In the distance, I could see smoke rising from the chimney of our nearest neighbor, a young couple who had settled on the land 2 miles to the east. Behind me, I heard the cabin door open. Nalin came out, carrying Henry on her hip. He was a year old now, walking and getting into everything. Liyana followed, carrying a basket of eggs from the chicken coop. "Papa!" Henry shouted when he saw me, reaching out his chubby arms. I took him from Nalin and lifted him high, making him giggle. Liyana set down the basket and ran over to hug me around the waist. "We are going to town today, remember?" Nalin said. "Father Miguel asked us to come for the church social." "I remember," I said. We loaded into the wagon and made the 3-hour journey to town. The church social brought together families from across the territory. Father Miguel greeted us warmly. Deputy Marshal Wallace was there with his new wife Anna, their hands intertwined. Maria Santos waved from across the yard, her daughter Rosa beside her. Even Judge Whitmore had come, retired now and living on a small ranch nearby. "You have a fine family, Ethan," the judge said, watching Liyana play with the other children. "I do," I agreed. "Thanks in large part to you." As the afternoon wore on, I watched Nalin laugh with the other women. I watched Liyana teach the younger children a game from school. I watched Henry toddle around, exploring everything with bright, curious eyes. Deputy Wallace came over and stood beside me. "You did good, Ethan." "We all did," I said quietly. "That is what made all the difference." I thought about that, about the choice I had made, about how easily I could have closed the gate and told that hungry child to move along. But I had not, and that choice had changed everything. As the sun began to set, we packed up and prepared for the journey home. Liyana was tired, leaning against Nalin in the back of the wagon. Henry was already asleep in his mother's arms. I drove the wagon slowly, in no hurry to get home. The evening was beautiful, the sky painted in shades of orange and pink and purple. A cool breeze carried the scent of sage and desert flowers. Nalin shifted Henry to one arm and reached over to take my hand. I glanced at her and she smiled. Not a big smile, but a content one. The smile of someone who had found peace after a long journey. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For opening the gate." I squeezed her hand. "Thank you for walking through it." We rode the rest of the way in comfortable silence, the wagon wheels creaking, the horses' hooves steady on the dusty road. Above us, the first stars began to appear, and I thought about Margaret, about the love I had lost and the love I had found, about how both were precious, about how both had shaped me into the man I was now. I would never forget Margaret, but I had learned that remembering the past did not mean living in it, that honoring the dead meant choosing to truly live. When we reached the ranch, I helped Nalin and the children inside. I put Henry in his cradle and tucked Liyana into her bed. Then Nalin and I stepped out onto the porch, as we did every evening, to watch the stars. "I am happy," Nalin said simply. "So am I," said. And it was true. After years of grief and loneliness, after loss and heartbreak, after fighting and struggling and refusing to give up, I had found my way back to happiness. Not the same happiness I had known before, but a new happiness, a deeper happiness, one built on sacrifice and choice and hard-won love. The wind whispered through the desert, carrying the promise of rain. The stars shone bright above us, and inside the cabin, my children slept peacefully, safe and loved. This was my life now. This was my family. This was my home. And when the dust finally settled, after all the storms had passed, what remained was simple and beautiful and true. We remained, together, forever. The end.